On a quiet afternoon in July 1976, 26 children boarded their school bus, unaware they were about to become hostages in one of America's most infamous crimes. But what if the driver behind the wheel that day wasn't who she appeared to be? What if, instead of a terrified employee, she was a federal agent running a meticulously planned sting operation? The men who hijacked that bus made one fatal mistake. They never considered that their greatest threat was the person they had already captured. This is the story of an undercover operation so audacious it redefined the rules of engagement. At its center was a federal agent who traded her badge for a bus driver's key, her mandate to infiltrate and dismantle a criminal network that saw a school bus not as a vehicle for children, but as the perfect cover for their operations. But to understand how she got there, you need to understand the chilling precedent that made this unthinkable sting not just possible, but necessary. The Chowchilla bus hijacking on July 15, 1976 wasn't just a crime. It was a national trauma that exposed a terrifying vulnerability. For 11 hours, 26 children and their driver were buried alive in a truck trailer, their fate in the hands of 3 kidnappers. The nation held its breath, and while the children were eventually rescued, the psychological damage was permanent. Long-term studies of those victims proved, for the first time, that children were not immune to severe post-traumatic stress. They carried the scars for life. This single event created a shadow that stretched for decades. It rewrote school security protocols nationwide. It installed two-way radios in buses. It trained drivers in emergency procedures. But it also did something else, something darker. It created a blueprint, a roadmap for how to exploit the most vulnerable transit system in America. And by the early 2000s, a new kind of predator was reading that map. Federal wiretaps and informants began picking up chatter about soft transport, not for kidnapping, but for moving product, drugs, cash, even weapons. The logic was chillingly simple. A school bus route is predictable, it's invisible to regular patrols, and it garners absolute trust. Who would ever think to pull over a bus full of children for a contraband sweep? It was the perfect blind spot. The Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force, a coalition of agencies including the FBI and DEA, identified a network operating across 3 states. Their leader was a man named Marcus Vance, a mid-level distributor with ambitions far bigger than his record. He was smart. He avoided flashy cars and direct deals. And he had a brother-in-law who managed a small private bus contractor that served several school districts. The pieces were there. The connection was made. But traditional surveillance hit a wall. They could see the outline of the operation, but they couldn't see inside it. They needed someone on the bus. This is where the story splits in two. On one side, the criminals, methodical and confident. On the other, a federal agent we'll call Elena Cruz. A 7-year veteran of the FBI's domestic counter-narcotics unit, Cruz had a reputation for patience and a near-photographic memory for faces and patterns. She didn't look like a typical agent. She was 5'4", with a calm, unassuming presence that made her excellent at undercover work. Her superiors called her a ghost. She could blend into a background and absorb information without ever being noticed. The proposal put to her was unprecedented. She would go deep undercover, not as a buyer or a girlfriend, but as a public employee. She would obtain a commercial driver's license through legitimate channels. She would apply for, and get, a job as a substitute bus driver for the very company Vance's relative managed. Her cover was ironclad, a single mother new to the area, needing flexible hours. Her backstory was painstakingly built, complete with a rented apartment, a fictional son in a fictional school district, and social media profiles that stretched back years. But here's the critical thing most people misunderstand about undercover operations. They don't happen on a hunch. According to legal guidelines refined by the Attorney General since 1976, the FBI must have probable cause before initiating such a complex sting. They already knew crimes were occurring. The operation wasn't to create a crime, but to document one already in progress. Cruz's mission was to confirm the route, the method, and the personnel. To get visual evidence of contraband being placed on or removed from her bus. To identify every link in the chain. For the first 3 weeks, it was pure routine. Early mornings, checking the bus's mechanical report, driving the exact same route, learning the names of the children, their stops, their little habits. She became Miss Alina, the quiet, friendly driver who always made sure everyone was buckled. Meanwhile, the surveillance team in unmarked vans and nearby apartments watched everything. They logged every deviation, every unscheduled stop, every interaction Cruz had with the depot manager, Vance's brother-in-law. Then on a Tuesday morning in late October, the pattern broke. The depot manager approached her after her route. "Got a special assignment today, Alina," he said, his tone casual. "After you drop the kids at Jefferson Elementary, come back to the depot. Don't refuel. Just park in Bay 3 and leave the keys in the visor. We need to do a deep clean on your bus. You can take the spare van for your afternoon route." It was a test, a subtle one, a legitimate reason to have her leave the bus unattended. But the timing was wrong. Deep cleans were scheduled for Fridays. Cruz smiled, nodded, and said, "No problem." As she drove her route, she relayed every word to her handlers via concealed transmitter. The command post buzzed with activity. This was the first move. If they took the bait and accessed the bus, they'd likely do it quickly. A team was scrambled to get eyes on Bay 3 from a distance. Cruz returned the bus, swapped it for the van, and drove off. From a warehouse roof 400 yards away, an agent with a high-power scope watched Bay 3. For 20 minutes, nothing. Then a nondescript white panel truck pulled in. Two men got out. They didn't wear company uniforms. One carried a large, heavy-looking duffel bag. They opened the bus's rear emergency door, not the main door. They were inside for exactly 4 minutes. When they emerged, the duffel bag was gone. They drove away. The bus had been loaded, but with what and for whom? The order came down. Cruz was to proceed exactly as normal. She would drive her afternoon route the next day, with the contraband presumably still hidden on board. She would be the unwitting mule, and somewhere along that route, someone would retrieve it. The entire operation now balanced on a knife's edge. Cruz had to drive a bus full of children, with an unknown quantity of illegal goods hidden somewhere in its frame, and act completely normal while a criminal pickup was attempted. The next afternoon, as she started her engine, Cruz performed her usual safety check, but her trained eyes swept the interior, looking for anything out of place. A fresh scratch near a floor panel, a slight residue on a seat bracket. The bus felt different. It was a living, rolling crime scene, and as she pulled out of the depot to begin her route, she saw the white panel truck again. It was parked 2 blocks away, watching. They weren't just following the bus, they were following her. She made her first stop. 2 children got on. She smiled, greeted them. Her heart was a steady drumbeat in her chest. The panel truck lingered at a distance. Second stop, third stop. The bus was half full now, the noise level rising with chatter and laughter. Then, as she approached a 4-way stop in a quiet residential neighborhood, a car ran the stop sign directly in front of her. Cruz slammed the brakes. The children lurched forward with a collective shout. It was a minor incident. No one was hurt. But in her mirror, she saw the white panel truck suddenly speed up, then pull over sharply. The men inside were agitated, pointing. They hadn't expected a sudden stop. It spooked them. The protocol was clear. If the cover was blown, if the operation was compromised, she was to abort immediately and drive to a predetermined safe location. But was it blown? Was this just criminal nervousness, or had they made her? She had 3 seconds to decide. The children were safe but confused. The panel truck's engine was still running. Every instinct told her to run the protocol. But if she did, the investigation died here. They'd lose Vance, the network, everything. She took a deep breath, put on her turn signal, and continued calmly down the route as if nothing had happened. The panel truck followed again, but now it kept a much greater distance. The tension was unbearable. She delivered the last child, waved goodbye to the parents, and began the return trip to the depot with an empty bus. This was the most dangerous window. No witnesses, the perfect time for the retrieval. As she turned onto a long, tree-lined service road, the panel truck suddenly accelerated, pulling up alongside her. The passenger window rolled down. The man inside didn't shout. He just held up a handwritten sign against the glass. It had 2 words, "Pull over." She was alone. The surveillance team was there, but minutes away. She had a weapon concealed under the dashboard. The man in the truck was pointing at the side of the road, his expression insistent. This was it. The retrieval, or was it an execution? Cruz had to make a choice. Obey and step into a potentially deadly confrontation, or refuse and trigger a chase with a 15-ton vehicle. She glanced in her mirror, her mind racing, and that's when she saw the second vehicle. A black sedan she hadn't noticed before, now closing fast from behind, boxing her in. They weren't here to pick up a package. They were here for her. Elena Cruz had rehearsed 100 scenarios in her mind, but never this one, trapped in a 15-ton vehicle with 2 hostile cars forcing her off the road and her only backup several minutes away. Every instinct screamed to reach for the gun under the dash, but that was the last resort, the absolute end of the operation and potentially her life. Instead, she did the only thing her cover allowed. She played confused. She slowed the bus, put on her hazard lights, and guided the massive vehicle onto the narrow shoulder, gravel crunching under the tires. Panel truck and the sedan pulled in behind her, blocking any reverse escape. 2 men got out of the truck. They didn't approach the bus doors. They walked straight to the rear emergency exit, the same one they'd used to load the duffel bag. One of them carried a small tool kit. They weren't here for her. They were here for the package. This was the retrieval, but it was happening under forced surveillance conditions. They were nervous. The near accident had spooked them, and now they were rushing, making mistakes. Cruz stayed in the driver's seat, watching them in her large side mirrors. She keyed her concealed microphone, her voice a whisper. Subjects are at the rear door, attempting access. This is a forced retrieval. I am maintaining cover. In the command post, chaos erupted. The surveillance team was still 2 miles out. The lead agent, a man named Harper, came over the radio. Elena, do not intervene. Repeat, do not engage. Let them take it. We have trackers in the duffel. Your safety is priority. But Cruz knew it wasn't that simple. If they took the package now with her sitting there passively, it might look right, or it might look *2 right. A normal driver would be curious, alarmed. She had to sell the performance. As the men worked on the door lock, Cruz opened her driver's side window and leaned out. Hey, she called, her voice pitched with credible annoyance. What are you doing back there? This is a school bus. The 2 men froze. One looked at the other, a quick, nervous exchange. The taller one stepped away from the bus and walked toward her window. He didn't look like a thug. He wore clean jeans and a work shirt. His face was calm, but his eyes were moving constantly, scanning the road. Company maintenance, ma'am, he said, his voice flat. Got a report of a hydraulic leak from your last stop. Got to check the rear assembly, standard procedure. It was a good lie, plausible, but his hands were empty of any diagnostic tools, only lock picks. Do you have an ID or a work order? Cruz asked, folding her arms on the windowsill, playing the part of a diligent employee. The man's expression tightened. He hadn't expected questions. It's an emergency check. Call the depot if you want. He was betting she wouldn't or couldn't. The depot manager was in on it. This was the pivot point. If she insisted on calling, she escalated the conflict potentially toward violence. If she capitulated, she reinforced her cover but let them control the narrative. She made a show of sighing, rolling her eyes in frustration. Fine, just hurry up. I have to get this bus back. She pulled her head back inside as if dismissing him. The man stared at her for a second longer, then returned to the rear door. 30 seconds later, they had it open. They were inside for less than a minute. When they emerged, the taller man was carrying the now lighter duffel. They didn't look at her again. They got in their vehicles and sped off, leaving her alone on the shoulder. Cruz sat there, her hands tight on the wheel, waiting for her heart to slow. The operation was still alive. The trackers were live, but something was wrong. The interaction felt off. It was too confrontational for a simple pickup. They had tested her, and she had responded exactly as a normal, slightly annoyed bus driver would. It should have been perfect. So why did she feel a cold knot of dread in her stomach? Back at the command post, the mood was triumphant. The trackers showed the duffel moving toward a known stash house. They had direct evidence of the retrieval method, but Harper noticed Cruz's silence on the comms. Elena's status, you did good, textbook. Her response was slow in coming. They weren't just picking up. They were checking the lock, seeing if it had been tampered with, and they looked at me. They were memorizing my face. The celebration in the command post cooled. Harper leaned forward. Explain. Cruz replayed the moment. The taller man's scanning eyes weren't just looking for cops. They were studying her asterisk. The vehicle, her posture, her reactions. I think they have a description, she said quietly, of an agent, and they're checking every new driver against it. This changed everything. It meant Marcus Vance was paranoid, sophisticated, and possibly had an information leak somewhere within law enforcement circles. The operation was no longer just about catching drug movers. It was a counterintelligence game. For the next 48 hours, Cruz lived in a state of hypervigilance. She drove her routes, smiled at the children, and felt watched. The surveillance team reported increased counter-surveillance activity, random cars lingering near the depot, dummy delivery trucks making repeated passes. Vance's network was tightening security. Meanwhile, the tracked duffel led them to a self-storage unit. A warrant was obtained, and the unit was opened covertly. What they found wasn't drugs. It was over $200,000 in cash, bundled and ready for movement. This was the other side of the operation: money collection. The bus wasn't just importing drugs, it was exporting cash. The pieces were coming together, but the pressure was mounting on Cruz. The depot manager began giving her irregular routes, swapping buses at the last minute. It was a classic counter-surveillance tactic designed to shake any possible tails. Her cover was being stress-tested daily. Then the break came from an unexpected angle. One of the children on her route, a talkative second grader named Liam, started chatting about his uncle. "My Uncle Mike has a cool job," he said one afternoon. "He drives a big white truck and delivers stuff at night. He said he even delivers stuff to my school sometimes, but it's a secret." Cruz filed the comment away, but that evening, while reviewing the dossier on Marcus Vance's known associates, she found a Michael Reese, Vance's younger brother. His photograph showed a man with a kind smile, completely unlike his brother's cold mugshot, and his listed occupation, long-haul trucker. But Liam's family name was different. A quick database check by the analysts revealed the connection. Liam's mother was Vance and Reese's sister, who had married and changed her name. The family link was direct, and it ran right through Cruz's bus route. This wasn't a coincidence. The route had been chosen specifically because it serviced the family neighborhood, providing a perfect excuse for any unusual sightings or contacts. This revelation turned the operation inside out. Cruz wasn't just infiltrating a criminal network, she was driving the nephew of the kingpin to school every day. The psychological stakes became unbearable. If the operation went loud, if shots were fired, this child she'd come to know was in the crossfire. She requested an urgent meeting with Harper. "We have to get Liam off this route. A transfer, something." Harper's response was grim: "We can't." Any change in the child's routine could alert the entire family. It would be a red flag. "You have to continue as normal." Normal became a torture. Every morning, smiling at Liam, helping him with his backpack, knowing his uncles were likely watching, assessing her through him. The operation was now a tinderbox, and a 7-year-old boy was sitting in the middle of it. The legal team began working overtime, crafting contingency plans for child endangerment scenarios, consulting the strict Attorney General guidelines that governed undercover conduct. They were walking a razor's edge between building a case and preventing a tragedy. Then the signal came. Through a tapped phone line, agents heard Marcus Vance give the order. "The new driver, the quiet one, I want her checked. Deep, use the school." For days, Cruz and the team waited, unsure what use the school meant. The answer came in the form of a parent-teacher conference notice slipped into Liam's backpack. It was addressed to Ms. Elena Cruz, requesting a meeting about Liam's behavior on the bus. The meeting was set for 4 p.m. on Friday at the school. It was a trap, a beautifully laid one. Refusing would mark her as suspicious. Attending would put her in a controlled environment with Vance's relatives, where every word and reaction could be dissected. The command post prepared her for days. They built a fuller legend for her fictional son, complete with forged report cards and pediatrician records. They rehearsed questions about child discipline, bus safety, everything a teacher might ask. But everyone knew the real test wouldn't be about parenting. It would be about her composure under the intimate, probing pressure of a face-to-face meeting with the enemy's family. Friday afternoon arrived. Cruz walked into Jefferson Elementary, a place of bright colors and children's artwork, her heart feeling like a block of ice. She was led to a small meeting room. Waiting for her wasn't just Liam's teacher. Sitting beside her was a woman Cruz recognized from surveillance photos, Angela Vance, Marcus's wife. She introduced herself as Liam's aunt, there to help translate any family concerns. Her smile was warm, her eyes were lasers. The teacher, unaware of the subtext, began with routine questions about Liam chatting during the ride. Cruz answered easily, sticking to her script. Then Angela Vance leaned forward. "Liam says you're very good with the children, so patient. He said you even helped him find his lost action figure that rolled under a seat. That was so kind. Not many people would take that time." It sounded like a compliment. It was an interrogation. How closely did she watch the children? How familiar was she with the bus's interior? Did she spend extra time searching the vehicle? Cruz smiled, kept her voice light. Oh, it's no trouble. I just hate the thought of a kid losing their favorite toy. It was a blue robot, right? She'd remembered the detail from weeks ago. Angela's smile widened, but it didn't reach her eyes. That's right, you have a good memory. The conversation pivoted. Liam mentioned you're new to the area. It must be hard being a single mom moving to a new town. Do you have family nearby? This was the deep check. Verifying her isolation, her vulnerability. Cruz recited her cover story, parents back in Ohio, no local support, just trying to make a fresh start. The meeting lasted 20 minutes. It felt like 20 hours. When she walked out, Cruz knew she'd passed a critical test, but she also knew something else. Angela Vance was not just a concerned aunt. She was a principal actor in the network, and she was now personally interested in the new bus driver. The operation had just gotten dangerously personal. The surveillance on the Vance household intensified. 2 nights after the parent-teacher meeting, agents watched Marcus Vance receive a visit from the 2 men from the panel truck, the retrieval team. An argument ensued in the driveway, visible through long-lens cameras. There was pointing, aggressive gestures. The team was spooked. They thought the bus driver encounter was too clean, too perfect. They were pushing Vance to shut down the school bus route to find a new method. Vance dismissed them, but the seed of doubt was planted. Harper made the call. They needed to accelerate the timeline. They couldn't wait for Vance to make a major drug move. They had enough on the money laundering, the conspiracy, the attempted retrieval. They would move on the stash house first, grab the lower-level players, and hope one would flip on Vance. The raid was scheduled for dawn 2 days later. Cruz was ordered to proceed with her morning route as if nothing was happening. Her job was to be a visible, normalizing presence to give Vance no reason to suspect the net was closing. That morning, as she drove, the radio chatter in her ear was a steady stream of tactical updates. Team Alpha in position, Team Beta standby. She dropped off children, her smile fixed. Liam got on at his stop. He was quieter than usual. As he walked down the aisle, he didn't just take his usual seat. He walked up to her and handed her a folded piece of paper. "My Uncle Mike said to give this to you," he whispered, before scurrying to his seat. The paper felt heavy in her hand. She couldn't open it now, not with children watching. She slipped it into her pocket, her blood turning cold. For the rest of the route, the paper burned a hole in her uniform. As she pulled back into the depot after the final drop-off, the command post came over her earpiece, their voices tense with confusion. "Elena, abort. The stash house is empty. Repeat, the target location is clean. They cleared out in the last 12 hours. The raid is off." The operation had been compromised. Someone had warned them. Cruz parked the bus, her hands shaking. In the privacy of the driver's seat, she finally unfolded the note Liam had given her. The handwriting was neat, blocky. It read, "The bus has a sickness. It needs a new driver. Get well soon." It wasn't a get well card. It was a threat, a coded, unmistakable threat. Sickness meant surveillance. New driver meant she was to be removed. Get well soon was a deadline they knew, or they strongly suspected. And the warning had come through a child, a deliberate act of psychological warfare. She reported the note, her voice hollow. The command post was in turmoil. The leak could be anywhere: local police involved in the raid briefing, a corrupted federal employee, or a simple surveillance mistake. Harper's voice was grim over the secure line. "Elena, your cover is critically compromised. Effective immediately, you are to initiate emergency extraction protocol. Do not return to your apartment. Do not contact anyone. A team is en route to your location now." But as she looked out the windshield of the parked bus, she saw the depot manager walking toward her vehicle, his pace brisk. He wasn't alone. 2 other men from the maintenance crew flanked him, their expressions blank. They were cutting off her exit from the bus. The extraction team was minutes out. The manager rapped his knuckles on the bus door, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Elena, need you to come to the office for a minute, quick paperwork thing." It wasn't a request. The men with him stood with their hands in their jackets. They were here to detain her, to question her, or worse. She was trapped in the metal cage of her own cover story, and the keys to her escape were walking toward her with violence in their eyes. The depot manager's smile was a thin, dangerous line. "Elena, need you to come to the office for a minute, quick paperwork thing." The 2 men with him shifted their weight, blocking the path to the parking lot. Every second of delay was critical. Her extraction team was closing in, but they were still 2 minutes out. 2 minutes was an eternity in a situation like this. Cruz forced a tired smile. "Paperwork now? I just finished the route. Can it wait until tomorrow?" She kept her voice light, conversational, buying time. The manager's smile didn't waver. "Won't take long. Corporate needs some updated insurance forms signed. Come on." He gestured toward the office door. It was a test. Refusal would confirm their suspicions. Compliance would walk her into a confined space with 3 hostile men. She made a show of sighing, grabbing her purse. All right, lead the way." As she stepped off the bus, she deliberately left the driver's door open and the keys in the ignition, a small, passive signal of disturbance for her team. She walked between the 2 silent men, her senses hyper-alert. The walk to the office was 50 feet. She counted each step. 20 steps in, the manager's phone rang. He answered, listened for a second, and his face changed. His eyes cut to her, then past her to the depot entrance. He didn't speak into the phone. He just said, "Now." The 2 men lunged. Cruz didn't wait. She dropped her purse and sprinted, not toward the parking lot, but back toward the buses, weaving between the parked yellow giants. A gunshot cracked, pinging off the metal side of a bus near her head. They were shooting. Her cover was completely, violently blown. She dove between 2 buses, scrambling on hands and knees. Her comms were live. "Shots fired. I'm under fire at the depot. Subjects are armed." Harper's voice was sharp. "Elena, get to cover. Extraction team is 60 seconds out. Do not engage." More shots. They were spreading out, trying to flank her. She could hear their footsteps on the gravel. She was trapped in a canyon of school buses. Then a new sound. Tires screeching, car doors slamming from the depot entrance. Shouts, "FBI, drop your weapons." Her team had arrived early. A fierce firefight erupted. Cruz pressed herself against a bus tire, listening to the controlled bursts from her colleagues. The gunfight was over in less than 30 seconds. Silence, then the sound of handcuffs clicking, Harper's voice in her ear. "Clear, Elena, come out, it's clear." She emerged to see the depot manager and his 2 men in custody, bleeding from non-lethal wounds. One agent was checking a bus for bullet holes. The scene was secure, but the operation was in ruins. As Cruz was hurried into a waiting sedan, she saw the manager staring at her, his expression not of anger, but of cold satisfaction. He knew they had lost the battle, but he believed they had won the war. The network was warned. At the safe house, the debrief was brutal. The raid on the stash house had been compromised because of a leak, but not from law enforcement. The analysts had traced the warning call. It came from a disposable phone purchased at a convenience store, but the timing was impossible. The call was made 12 hours before the raid was even scheduled, before the tactical teams were briefed. Vance hadn't been tipped off about the raid. He had been tipped off about the investigation. Someone had told him the FBI was watching his buses weeks ago. This changed everything. The entire undercover operation from day one had been conducted under the target's partial awareness. Cruz's cover had never been solid. Every interaction, every test had been a double-blind game. Vance had been using her to feed misinformation, to study FBI tactics. The money in the storage unit, it was a plant. A sacrifice to make the investigation feel successful, to keep them looking in the wrong direction. The realization was a sucker punch. They had been playing checkers while Vance was playing chess. And the worst part was the leak's origin. Forensic accounting of Vance's operation showed massive, regular payments to a shell company that, after hours of digging, was linked to a former county sheriff's deputy turned private security consultant, a man who had retired 2 years earlier after being injured in the line of duty. A hero and a traitor. With the operation burned, the FBI had 2 choices: shut it down and try again in 6 months, or go loud and aggressive, risking the entire case collapsing in court. Harper argued for the latter. They had enough for conspiracy charges, for weapons charges from the firefight, and now for corruption of a public official. But they needed Marcus Vance himself, and he had gone to ground. For 3 days there was no sign of him. His house was empty. His known associates vanished. It was as if the network had dissolved into the air. Then, on the morning of the 4th day, a call came into the FBI field office. It was from Angela Vance, Marcus's wife. She was crying, hysterical. She said she wanted to make a deal. She was at a motel on the interstate with Liam. She said she was afraid for her life and her nephew's life. She said Marcus had discovered the lake, the corrupt deputy, and had killed him. And now he thought she was the one who had turned him in. This was the break, but it stank of a trap. Harper dispatched a team to secure Angela and Liam, while Cruz watched from the command post via live feed. The motel room was dark. Angela was indeed there, with Liam, both looking terrified. She surrendered a ledger, a handwritten record of shipments, dates, and payments that went back years. It was a goldmine. But as the agents were escorting them to a car, Angela pulled one agent close and whispered something that made his blood run cold. She said, "He's not running, he's finishing the job. He's got a bus, a real one, he's going to use it tomorrow morning." When pressed, she broke down. Marcus, in his paranoia, had devised a final, catastrophic insurance policy. If the network was compromised, he would execute a burn shot. He would use a stolen school bus, loaded with a dangerous, volatile chemical precursor used in drug manufacturing, and drive it into a government building. The resulting fire and toxic cloud would be a diversion, a terror event that would occupy every law enforcement agency in the state, allowing his core operators to escape during the chaos. He had chosen the regional DEA office as the target. The timeline was impossible. It was already 10 p.m. The attack was planned for the morning rush hour. At 7 a.m., they had 9 hours to find a man, a bus, and an explosive chemical load in a metropolitan area of 2 million people. Every resource was scrambled. Helicopters with thermal cameras scanned bus depots and storage yards. Traffic cameras were reviewed for sightings of a bus matching the description Angela gave, an older model, blue, with a mismatched rear door. At 3 a.m., a break. An automated license plate reader on a highway on-ramp caught a glimpse of the blue bus. It was heading not toward the city, but away from it, into the sprawling, industrial riverfront district. The area was a maze of abandoned factories, warehouses, and shipyards, perfect for hiding, perfect for an ambush. A tactical team, including crews now armed and in full gear, converged on the location. They moved through the pitch-black streets in armored vehicles using night vision. They found the bus parked inside a cavernous, decaying textile mill. It was empty, no vents, no chemicals, but the bus wasn't empty. In the driver's seat was a mannequin dressed in a bus driver's uniform. Around its neck was a sign. It read in bold letters, "Looking for MELENA." It was a message, a taunt. He knew she was there. He knew she was part of the team. The entire assault was a setup. As the team leader called for a fallback, the first explosion ripped through the building, not from the bus, but from pre-planted charges in the support columns. The mill began to collapse. The team scrambled for the exits as rubble rained down. Cruz was knocked off her feet by a concussive wave, her comms filled with shouts and static. Through the dust, she saw figures moving in the chaos. Not her team, shadowy shapes, armed, firing controlled bursts. Vance hadn't run, he had laid a counter-ambush. He was trying to wipe out the entire FBI team. The firefight that followed was a nightmare of close-quarters combat in a collapsing building. Cruz, separated from her team, fought her way toward an exit, engaging multiple hostiles. She saw Harper go down, hit in the leg. She dragged him behind a concrete pillar as gunfire chewed the air around them. They were pinned, outnumbered. Their radios were jammed. The extraction signal was a flare, but they were in no position to light one. Then a new sound cut through the gunfire. The deep, guttural roar of a diesel engine starting. Headlights flicked on, blinding them. It was the blue bus. It wasn't parked anymore. It was moving, crashing through a boarded-up loading bay door, heading straight for their position. The driver wasn't a mannequin now. Behind the wheel, illuminated by the dash lights, was the grim, determined face of Marcus Vance. He was using the bus as a weapon, a 15-ton battering ram aimed at the pillar shielding them. Cruz shoved Harper out of the way as the bus plowed into the concrete. The impact threw her through the air. She landed hard, her breath knocked out, her weapon skittering away. The bus was stuck, its front end crumpled against the pillar. The driver's door flew open. Vance jumped out, a shotgun in his hands. He wasn't looking at her. He was walking toward Harper, who was struggling to rise. This was execution, not escape. Cruz, unarmed, hurt, saw her chance. Vance's back was to her. She pushed to her feet, ignoring the pain in her ribs. She didn't charge him. She moved to the bus. The engine was still running, the door open. She climbed into the driver's seat. The gear shift was heavy. She threw it into reverse, stomped on the gas. The bus groaned, metal shrieking as it tore itself free from the pillar. Vance spun around, raising his shotgun. He fired. The windshield spiderwebbed but held. Cruz ducked, shifted into drive, and aimed the massive vehicle right at him. He stood his ground, firing again. The second shot blew out a headlight. Then from the shadows a burst of automatic fire, not from Vance, from the remaining members of the tactical team who had regrouped. Vance stumbled, hit. He dropped to one knee. Cruz slammed the brakes, the bus skidding to a stop just feet from him. She jumped out, grabbed the shotgun from the ground, and trained it on him as the tactical team swarmed, securing the scene. It was over. Marcus Vance was in custody, bleeding but alive. His men were captured or dead. The chemical precursor was found later, hidden in a different warehouse. The network was decapitated, but as Cruz stood there in the rubble, the adrenaline fading, she felt no triumph. Only a deep, hollow cold. They had won. But the cost was written in the blood on the floor and the terrified face of a child used as a messenger, and in the shocking betrayal of a man sworn to protect. The official report would call it a success. A major drug trafficking and money laundering ring dismantled. A corrupt official exposed. But for Elena Cruz, the victory was poisoned. She had looked into the abyss of a criminal mind that saw a school bus not just as a tool, but as a weapon and a shield. And she had seen how close they came to a catastrophe that would have echoed the trauma of Chowchilla for a new generation. As the sun rose over the riverfront, painting the wreckage in pale light, one question remained, a question that would haunt her long after the medals were pinned and the reports were filed. In a world where the line between protector and predator could be so thin, how do you ever truly know which one is behind the wheel? In the cold light of day, the scale of the victory was matched only by the depth of the scars it left behind. Marcus Vance and 14 members of his network were indicted on 47 federal counts, ranging from drug trafficking and money laundering to conspiracy, weapons charges, and the attempted murder of federal officers. The corrupt former sheriff's deputy was found dead in his home, an apparent suicide, with a note that confirmed his betrayal but offered no motive. The case was a prosecutor's dream, built on physical evidence, audio recordings, and eyewitness testimony from a decorated undercover agent. But the real battle moved from the streets to the courtroom. Vance's defense team, paid for with his still-seized assets, mounted an aggressive strategy. They didn't deny the crimes. They attacked the method. They claimed entrapment, arguing that the FBI had not merely documented a crime, but had manufactured one through an overly aggressive sting operation that pushed their client into increasingly desperate acts. They pointed to the parent-teacher meeting, the use of the child Liam, the constant surveillance pressure as proof of an operation that crossed the line from investigation into provocation. The legal fight hinged on the Attorney General's guidelines, the very rules researched at the start of this story. Prosecutors had to prove that the illegal nature of the activity was clear to Vance before the undercover operation began, and that agents did not use excessive inducement. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Elena Cruz spent 3 days on the witness stand, her identity now public, detailing every step of the operation. The defense tried to break her, to paint her as an ambitious agent who used children as pawns. She remained calm, factual, and relentless. Her most powerful moment came when the defense attorney asked if she ever considered the psychological impact on Liam. She looked directly at the jury and said, "Every single day. And every single day, I remembered that the greater danger to Liam was the network his own family had built. My job wasn't to protect him from a difficult truth. My job was to protect him from a future controlled by that truth." The jury was silent. Vance was convicted on all counts. He received a sentence of 120 years without parole, effectively a life sentence. His brother-in-law, the depot manager, got 30 years. Angela Vance, who had cooperated, entered witness protection with Liam, who was placed in the custody of a maternal aunt from another state. For the FBI, the operation was declared a landmark success. It became a case study in interagency cooperation and the use of deep undercover work against sophisticated criminal enterprises. New protocols were written for screening transportation contractors that worked with schools, but within the Bureau, there was a somber acknowledgement of the cost. Agent Harper retired on disability due to his leg injury. The tactical team members involved in the mill fight underwent mandatory psychological evaluations. And Elena Cruz, she was offered a promotion, a desk job training new undercover agents. She turned it down. The experience had changed her in fundamental ways. She took a 6-month leave of absence. Officially, it was for recovery and debriefing. Unofficially, she was grappling with the moral vertigo of the work. She had looked into the eyes of a child she had grown to care for, knowing she was lying to him every day for a greater good. That weight doesn't just go away. A year after the trial, Cruz quietly resigned from the FBI. She didn't leave law enforcement. She joined a nonprofit organization focused on child safety and trauma intervention, specializing in training school personnel and transportation workers to recognize signs of exploitation and coercion. She found a different kind of mission, one of prevention rather than reaction. She never spoke publicly about the Vance case again. But the story had one final, surprising twist, a detail that only emerged years later during a routine review of closed files. Liam, the little boy who had been the unwitting messenger, was tracked down by a journalist doing a long-term piece on children affected by high-profile crimes. Now a teenager, Liam was thriving. He was an honor student, a member of his school's debate team. And when asked about Miss Alina, his old bus driver, he said he didn't remember much about that time, which psychologists said was a common protective memory block. But he did remember one thing clearly. He remembered a day when she had helped him find his lost action figure, a blue robot. He said, "She was really nice about it. She didn't get mad that I was out of my seat. She just helped me look until we found it." He had no idea who she really was or what was happening around him. And in that innocent recollection was the most powerful vindication of Alina Cruz's terrible choices. In the middle of a lethal game of deception, she had managed to offer one small, genuine moment of kindness to a child caught in the crossfire. For her, that became the only medal that mattered. The legal and systemic ripples of the operation continued. The scandal of the corrupt deputy led to a federal audit of information-sharing protocols between local and federal law enforcement, resulting in stricter polygraph and financial disclosure requirements for personnel with access to sensitive investigations. The bus company involved lost its contracts with 3 school districts and filed for bankruptcy. And in a direct response to the case, Congress allocated additional funding for the DEA's Chemical Diversion Control Program, making it harder for criminals to acquire the precursors. Vance had almost turned into a weapon. The shadow of Chowchilla, the case that started this all, finally met its modern counterpart. The two events, separated by decades, formed a grim timeline of evolving threats to school transportation. The first was a crime of abduction for ransom. The second was a crime of using the institution itself as a weapon and a shield. The lesson was clear. The vulnerability was never just the children on the bus. It was the sacred trust the yellow bus represented. Once that trust could be mimicked or corrupted, the potential for harm was limitless. So was the undercover sting a success? By the numbers, unequivocally yes. A major network was destroyed. A corrupt official was exposed. New safeguards were put in place. But success in the shadowy world of undercover work is never a simple equation. It is measured in years of a man's life spent in prison, balanced against the psychological cost paid by the agent who put him there. It is measured in a child's lost innocence, weighed against the future crimes the child was spared from witnessing. Alina Cruz traded her badge for a bus driver's key to answer one haunting question. Could the very symbol of childhood safety be used to smuggle danger right under our noses? The answer, as we now know, was a terrifying yes. But her story also provides a corollary, a final piece of resolution. The same vehicle that can be turned into a tool for crime can also be commandeered, at great personal risk, as a tool for justice. The bus is just metal and rubber. It is the human being behind the wheel who decides its purpose. The real sting operation wasn't just about catching criminals. It was a demonstration that the armor of trust, once pierced, must be repaired by those willing to sit in the driver's seat and stare down the darkness, even when every instinct tells them to run. The story that began with the trauma of Chowchilla and escalated into a modern-day sting operation leaves us with a disquieting question about the world we've built. We design systems for safety, school buses, security checks, trusted institutions, and in doing so we create blueprints. Blueprints that can be followed for protection or for predation. The greatest vulnerability is never the lock or the gate. It is the assumption that everyone who holds a key deserves it. Alina Cruz's mission exposed a terrifying reality, that the mechanisms of everyday life can be weaponized. but it also demonstrated a more hopeful truth, that the same anonymity that shields a criminal can also cloak a guardian, that courage isn't always a loud charge into battle. Sometimes, it's the quiet, daily discipline of maintaining a cover, of driving the route, of holding a terrifying secret while helping a child find a lost toy. The legal and tactical lessons from this case are now in manuals and training programs, but the human lesson is simpler and more profound. It asks us to look beyond the uniform, the job title, the predictable routine. It reminds us that heroism doesn't announce itself. It often works in silence, bearing a weight the rest of us will never see, all to ensure that the journey to school remains a journey of promise, not peril. The bus has returned to its route. The children board it each morning, unaware of the silent war that was once fought over their safety. And perhaps that is the final, most meaningful victory, that after the sting, the gunfire, and the courtroom battles, the most powerful outcome is a return to boring, beautiful normalcy. If this story changed how you see the ordinary world around you, the quiet people who operate it, then you understand why we tell these tales. The most incredible secrets are often hiding in plain sight, driven right past us every single day. For more stories that pull back the curtain on the hidden battles shaping our world, make sure to subscribe. Your curiosity is what keeps these truths in the light. Thanks for watching.